If you think the Ice Age was about fire and fur, you're not even close. They didn't have jackets, they didn't have houses, and on some nights, their breath froze before it hit the air. So how the hell did Ice Age humans survive temperatures that would kill most of us in hours? The truth is bloodier, colder, and far more disturbing than you've been told. When fire wasn't enough, they turned to flesh clinging to each other, naked, under animal hides still dripping with warmth. Children slept inside gutted carcasses. Mothers fed their families with meat scraped from frozen bones, not always from animals. Some tribes believed that warmth was a spirit, and if you couldn't create it, you had to steal it from your enemies, or even your dead. Body heat wasn't just a comfort, it was currency. Rituals were brutal. Exile meant death. And mercy? That was a modern luxury. This isn't the story of heroic cavemen hunting mammoths. This is the story of how humans bent every moral, burned every rule, and did the unthinkable, just to make it to morning. And what they did when they failed is even worse. Ice Age humans survived by stripping naked and forming human heat piles, because apparently wearing clothes to bed was too mainstream for our ancestors. Archaeological evidence from Pavlov in the Czech Republic reveals sleeping areas specifically designed for 15 to 20 bodies pressed together like some prehistoric version of extreme cuddling. We're not talking about cozy family bonding here. This was full-contact survival with strangers, because staying alive meant checking your personal space issues at the cave entrance. The bone needles found at these sites tell an even more interesting story. You might think they were for making warm clothes, but no. They were primarily used to secure massive communal fur blankets over what was essentially a wiggling mass of naked humanity. Picture a giant fur tortilla wrapped around a filling of bare bodies, and you've got the basic idea. These weren't optional slumber parties either. The archaeological evidence shows this was standard practice across multiple sites, suggesting that if you wanted to wake up not frozen, you had to join the pile. Natural selection literally favored the snugglers. Those who couldn't handle the extreme intimacy simply didn't survive to pass on their genes. What's particularly fascinating is how this behavior got hardwired into our species. Ever notice how humans still instinctively huddle together during emergencies? That's not random. It's your Ice Age programming kicking in, telling you that body heat equals survival. Your ancestors' naked cuddle piles literally shaped human psychology. The sleeping arrangements also created some interesting social dynamics. When you're pressed skin to skin with your entire community every night, it becomes pretty hard to maintain the usual social hierarchies. Status, age, and gender distinctions tend to fade when everyone's equally naked and desperate not to freeze. But this was just the beginning of our ancestors' creative approach to staying warm. Because if you think naked group sleeping is wild, wait until you hear what they did with the dead bodies. Dead bodies retain heat for roughly 12 hours after death, and Ice Age humans weren't about to waste that thermal energy. Welcome to the most morbid recycling program in history. At sites like Dolny Vistonis, archaeologists have found something that would make modern morticians faint. Corpses carefully positioned around living areas, not for burial or respect, but as makeshift space heaters. Because when you're facing temperatures of negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, grief becomes a luxury you literally cannot afford. The system was disturbingly efficient. The recently deceased were arranged in walls around sleeping areas, their decomposing flesh generating warmth through bacterial activity for days. Think of it as a very Gothic radiator system. The bodies would be rotated, yes, actually rotated, to maximize heat distribution, with the freshest corpses placed closest to the living areas. Archaeological evidence suggests some communities kept bodies for up to a week before final disposal. They developed precise techniques for positioning the dead to create windbreaks while maximizing thermal output. The deceased became part of the household infrastructure. a final contribution to the community's survival that lasted well beyond their last breath. The practice wasn't limited to adults either. Child-sized remains have been found arranged in similar patterns, though typically closer to sleeping areas. Because apparently, when you're trying not to freeze to death, size optimization of your thermal resources becomes critically important. This wasn't just desperate improvisation. It was a systematic approach to survival that required communities to fundamentally reimagine their relationship with death. The archaeological record shows evidence of special tools developed specifically for corpse manipulation and positioning, suggesting this was a well-established practice that continued for generations. The most unsettling part? It worked. Communities that practiced strategic corpse placement had significantly higher survival rates during extreme cold periods. Death literally became a utility, as routine as collecting firewood or storing food. Sites with evidence of this practice show longer continuous occupation than those without, suggesting it became a crucial part of winter survival strategies. But here's where it gets really interesting. These communities had to develop elaborate social structures to make this practice sustainable. You can't just start using your relatives as space heaters without some serious cultural framework to prevent everything from falling apart. Evidence suggests they created complex rituals around the practice, transforming what could have been traumatic into something approaching normal. Ice Age communities practiced calculated abandonment of elderly members during the harshest months, a brutal survival math that would make modern actuaries flinch. At sites like Sungir in Russia, archaeologists have uncovered a grim pattern: burial grounds with age-stratified remains that spike dramatically during winter months. But this wasn't random tragedy. It was resource management on an unthinkably personal scale. The arithmetic was as cold as the climate. One elderly person's full fur clothing could outfit 3 children. Their daily caloric needs could sustain 2 adults for a week. In temperatures where every calorie and scrap of warmth meant survival, communities faced impossible choices. Naturally, this went exactly as well as you'd expect. The archaeological evidence shows communities developed elaborate rituals around these decisions, not from sentimentality, but because you need some serious cultural infrastructure to keep society functioning when retirement planning means deciding when to sacrifice grandma. The fur wasn't just clothing. It was inheritance, insurance, and survival rolled into one blood-soaked package. Sites across Ice Age Europe show careful preservation and redistribution of clothing from the elderly to the young. Some communities even develop specific roles for those who would process these inherited resources, complete with specialized tools and dedicated spaces. The practice appears to have been surprisingly systematic. Evidence suggests communities would assess their resources at the start of winter, calculate their likely needs, and make their decisions accordingly. Because apparently, when facing extinction, even family bonds become subject to cost-benefit analysis. But here's the truly fascinating part. Many elderly members appear to have participated willingly in these arrangements. Burial sites show signs of ceremonial preparation and ritualized farewells. Some remains indicate individuals stopped eating days before their death, essentially pre-allocating their resources to the community. The social implications were staggering. Communities had to develop complex systems of reciprocity and obligation to ensure these sacrifices were honored. Archaeological evidence suggests the children who received an elder's furs often had specific responsibilities to their memory, a kind of generational contract written in warmth and survival. This wasn't just about immediate survival either. The practice shaped how entire communities thought about age, responsibility, and resource distribution. Sites with evidence of systematic elder sacrifice show more sophisticated resource-sharing systems overall, suggesting these brutal decisions actually strengthened social bonds rather than destroying them. And because history loves irony, the communities that practiced these calculated departures often had better long-term survival rates. It turns out that having clear, if horrifying, protocols for resource distribution during crisis helped more people survive than communities that tried to save everyone until the bitter end. Which brings us to an even more disturbing innovation in Ice Age survival. When your food supplies run low, that recently departed elder represents another kind of resource entirely. Fresh mammoth blood contains 3,000 calories per liter and stays liquid at temperatures that would freeze your morning coffee solid. And yes, our Ice Age ancestors absolutely drank it. Archaeologists have found specialized blood collection tools and storage vessels across Siberian sites, designed not for ritual purposes, but for immediate consumption. Because apparently, when you're freezing to death, you develop a taste for the world's most metal energy drink. The physics made brutal sense. Mammoth blood, like most large mammal blood, contains proteins that act as natural antifreeze. At temperatures where water turned solid, this nutrient-rich liquid remained drinkable. Sites like Berelek show evidence of communities consuming up to 2 liters daily during peak winter months. The Inuit later perfected this technique, creating blood sausages that could provide internal heating for hours. The heat generated by digesting protein-rich blood helped maintain core body temperature, while delivering crucial nutrients that weren't available in frozen meat. It was like having a space heater in your stomach. But it wasn't just about staying warm. The iron content in mammoth blood helped prevent anemia, a serious concern when fresh vegetables were buried under meters of ice. The high protein content supported muscle maintenance during periods of limited food, and the caloric density meant you could consume your daily energy needs in a few horrifying gulps. The archaeological evidence suggests this wasn't just opportunistic feeding. Communities developed specific hunting techniques to maximize blood collection. They created specialized tools for draining and storing blood quickly before it could freeze. Some sites show evidence of blood being mixed with other liquids to create what we can only assume were prehistoric energy drinks. The practice shaped hunting patterns too. Communities would track mammoth herds not just for meat and fur, but specifically for access to fresh blood. The massive size of mammoths meant one successful hunt could provide enough blood to sustain a small group for days, if they could collect and consume it quickly enough. Storage was another challenge they solved with disturbing creativity. Fresh blood was often stored inside animal stomachs or bladders, where body heat could keep it liquid. Some communities apparently carried these makeshift thermoses during hunting trips, drinking them as needed for an instant burst of warmth and energy. The most fascinating part? The practice was so effective that variations of it continued long after the Ice Age. From Mongolian warriors to modern Maasai herders, blood drinking persisted wherever people needed concentrated nutrition in extreme conditions. Turns out our ancestors were onto something with their mammoth blood cocktails. And because this particular survival technique required quick consumption of fresh blood, communities developed elaborate sharing systems to ensure nothing went to waste. Which leads us to their next innovation in thermal management, turning bodily functions into heating opportunities. Ice Age humans turned every bodily function into a community heating opportunity, including strategic urination zones that would make modern public health officials faint. Archaeological evidence from sites like Malta reveals designated urination areas carefully positioned to maximize heat retention. Fresh urine, steaming at a toasty 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, could warm a small space for precious minutes. And yes, our ancestors absolutely developed rotating schedules to maintain these DIY heating zones throughout the night. But it gets better. Communities didn't stop at liquid waste. Fecal matter was systematically collected and dried for fuel, burning hotter and longer than many types of wood. Analysis of hearth remains shows clear evidence of, shall we say, alternative fuel sources mixed with traditional firewood. The logistics were surprisingly sophisticated. Excavations show specially designated collection areas positioned to minimize heat loss while maximizing ventilation. Some sites reveal evidence of shared facilities designed to capture and retain body heat from multiple users simultaneously. The social organization required for these systems was impressive. Communities developed coordinated schedules ensuring constant heat generation throughout the night. Archaeological evidence suggests some groups maintained these thermal management systems for generations, refining techniques for maximum efficiency. And because apparently regular waste management wasn't complicated enough, they integrated these systems with other survival strategies. Urine was sometimes collected in animal bladders, creating portable heat sources for hunting trips. Some sites show evidence of waste material being used to insulate sleeping areas, proving that desperate times really do call for desperate measures. The most fascinating part? These weren't random acts of desperation. Cut marks on bones and tool arrangements suggest carefully planned systems designed to capture and utilize every possible source of heat, including bodily functions that modern humans prefer not to discuss in polite company. Let's be clear, this wasn't about poor hygiene. These were sophisticated survival strategies developed by people who understood exactly how many calories they needed to generate to make it through the night. When the temperature drops low enough, dignity becomes a luxury you literally cannot afford. This whole-body approach to thermal management shaped community structures in ways we're only beginning to understand. Sites show evidence of designated areas for different bodily functions, each positioned to contribute to the overall heating strategy. Because when survival depends on maintaining every degree of warmth, nothing goes to waste. The practice was so effective that variations persisted long after the Ice Age in extreme environments. Some Arctic communities maintained similar systems well into the historical period, proving that our ancestors' creative approach to waste heat management wasn't just prehistoric panic. It was practical engineering. Of course, when even your bathroom breaks are part of the survival strategy, you start looking for more efficient heating methods. Which brings us to their next innovation, calculating the BTU content of their neighbors. When firewood ran low, Ice Age humans discovered something horrifying. Human fat burns at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter and longer than wood or animal fat. The archaeological evidence from Gough's Cave in England tells a story that would make a horror writer flinch. We're not talking about random acts of violence or ritual sacrifice. These were calculated decisions made by communities watching their fuel supplies dwindle. Someone, at some point, had to run the brutal math on human BTU content, and they took detailed notes. The processing was systematic. Cut marks on bones show precise dismemberment techniques designed for maximum caloric extraction. Long bones were carefully cracked for marrow. Skulls weren't just trophies. They became drinking vessels because, apparently, when you're burning someone for heat, you might as well make full use of the remains. The efficiency is what makes it truly chilling. Human fat, with its high energy density, could maintain critical temperatures far longer than traditional fuels. Communities developed specific techniques for rendering and storing this macabre fuel source. Some sites show evidence of designated processing areas, carefully positioned to minimize waste and maximize heat retention. But here's where it gets even darker. They kept records. Not written ones, obviously, but archaeological evidence suggests they tracked which body types produced the most efficient fuel. Remains show preferential selection of individuals with higher body fat percentages. They weren't just surviving, they were optimizing their human fuel production. The social implications must have been staggering. Imagine living in a community where everyone knew exactly how many hours of warmth their body could provide. Some sites show evidence of elaborate rituals around these practices, presumably to maintain some semblance of social order while literally burning their neighbors for heat. And because survival rarely requires just one horrible solution, they combined this practice with other thermal management strategies. Human fat would be mixed with traditional fuels to extend burn times. Bone marrow was extracted and stored, providing both emergency food and backup fuel supplies. The practice wasn't limited to adults. Analysis of infant remains shows similar processing patterns, suggesting that in times of extreme cold, no potential fuel source was considered off-limits. When your choices are burning the dead or joining them, moral calculations take on a different weight. What's most unsettling isn't the practice itself, it's how good they got at it. The archaeological record shows refinement of these techniques over generations. They didn't just stumble into this solution, they developed it into a science. A horrible, nightmare-inducing science, but a systematic one nonetheless. The next time someone complains about their heating bill, remember, our ancestors faced such desperate fuel shortages that they literally calculated the fuel efficiency of their fallen companions. Makes running out of firewood seem like a minor inconvenience. But burning the dead was just one part of their survival strategy. When it came to generating heat, the living had their own creative solutions, starting with marathon dance sessions that would put modern raves to shame. Marathon dance sessions at Ice Age sites like Lascaux weren't artistic expression. They were desperate attempts to raise core body temperature through exhaustive movement. Picture this: dozens of humans in a cave, dancing themselves to the edge of collapse. Not for fun, but because stopping meant freezing to death. The worn floor patterns tell the story. Systematic, repetitive movements designed to generate maximum body heat with minimum energy waste. This wasn't interpretive dance. This was survival choreography. The evidence is literally carved into the cave floors. Archaeologists have mapped distinct patterns of wear that could only come from repeated, coordinated movement by large groups. The handprints on walls weren't random decoration. They were positioning guides for complex, heat-generating routines that could last 8 to 12 hours. These weren't spontaneous dance parties. Communities developed sophisticated rotation systems, with groups cycling through in shifts to maintain continuous movement throughout the night. While one group danced, others would rest in tight clusters, preserving the precious heat their companions generated. The cave paintings themselves may have served as instruction manuals, showing which movements produced the most warmth for the least effort. The logistics were surprisingly complex. Larger individuals would be positioned strategically to create windbreaks. Younger, more energetic dancers would take the outer positions where heat loss was greatest. Some sites show evidence of designated recovery zones, where exhausted dancers could briefly rest without losing too much body heat. The physical toll must have been intense. Skeletal remains from these sites show distinct wear patterns consistent with repetitive, high-impact movement. But the alternative was worse. Analysis suggests these sessions could raise the temperature in enclosed cave sections by up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. When you're facing sub-zero temperatures, that difference is literally life or death. And because Ice Age humans never met a survival strategy they couldn't optimize, they combined these dance sessions with other heat-generating activities. Evidence suggests they timed their communal meals and social rituals around these movement patterns, creating a continuous cycle of thermal management that kept communities alive through the darkest months. Some sites even show signs of specialized instruments designed specifically for these survival dances, not for musical enjoyment, but to maintain the crucial rhythms that kept people moving when exhaustion set in. Because nothing motivates like a drummer who knows everyone will freeze if they stop. But generating heat through movement was just the beginning. When the dance sessions ended, our ancestors turned to even more intimate forms of thermal management. After all, why waste all that carefully generated body heat sleeping alone? Ice Age cannibalism wasn't just desperate survival. It was a sophisticated meal planning system with specialized butchering techniques designed to extract every possible calorie from the human body. At sites like Atapuerca in Spain, archaeologists have found human bones with precise cut marks, that reveal an almost surgical knowledge of human anatomy. These weren't random acts of hunger-driven violence. The cuts show careful removal of major muscle groups, systematic extraction of organs, and methodical breaking of bones to access marrow. This was calculated cuisine, with clear evidence of different preparation techniques for different body parts. The math is disturbingly practical. One adult human body could provide enough calories to keep 3 people alive for nearly a week. The bone marrow alone contains about 2,000 calories, enough to fuel a person's basic survival for a day. Internal organs, properly preserved, could provide essential nutrients unavailable in frozen meat. Because apparently, when facing starvation, humans become extremely innovative nutritionists. Archaeological evidence suggests communities developed specific preservation techniques for human meat. Cut marks and burn patterns indicate they created jerky, rendered fat, and even made bone broth. Waste not, want not, I suppose. Some sites show evidence of specialized tools designed specifically for processing human remains, suggesting this wasn't a rare emergency measure but a regular part of winter survival strategy. To maintain social order while literally consuming their neighbors, communities developed elaborate rituals around these practices. Skeletal remains often show consistent patterns of processing, indicating strict rules about who could be eaten and how they should be prepared. Some sites suggest certain body parts were reserved for specific members of the community. Social hierarchy expressed through cannibalistic etiquette, because of course it was. The evidence for these practices spans continents and millennia. From the Magdalenian sites in France to the depths of Siberian caves, archaeologists have found remarkably similar butchering techniques. This wasn't random desperation. It was a widely shared survival technology, refined over generations. And because Ice Age humans were nothing if not efficient, they combined their cannibalistic practices with other survival strategies. Bodies would be positioned to maximize their thermal properties while being processed, and consumption would be timed to generate maximum internal heat during the coldest hours. But individual meals were just one part of their survival strategy. When food sources became scarce, communities had to make even more complex decisions about resource allocation. After all, why waste precious calories on individuals who couldn't contribute to the group's survival? Human nature. We're all just one really bad winter away from calculating the caloric content of our neighbors. Speaking of complex resource allocation, wait until you hear how Ice Age communities turned reproduction into a mathematical equation. Group mating rituals in the Ice Age weren't about romance. They were sophisticated heat generation systems that turned procreation into a survival technology. At sites across Europe, archaeologists have found evidence of large communal spaces specifically designed for group activities that generated significant body heat. The worn floor patterns and strategic positioning of Venus figurines suggest these weren't casual encounters, but carefully orchestrated community events designed to keep everyone alive through the coldest nights. The math is surprisingly practical. Multiple adults engaging in coordinated physical activity could raise the temperature of a small cave space by 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. In temperatures that regularly dropped below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. That difference meant survival, because apparently, when facing extinction, even intimacy becomes a matter of thermal engineering. These weren't spontaneous encounters. Archaeological evidence suggests communities developed specific seasonal schedules for these activities, timing them to coincide with the harshest weather. The positioning of artifacts and body impressions in cave floors indicates these were organized events involving most of the adult population. Think of it as prehistoric central heating with benefits. The famous Venus figurines found at these sites weren't just fertility symbols. They were instruction manuals. Their exaggerated features and specific poses appear to demonstrate positions that maximized heat generation and distribution among participants. Some figurines show evidence of being handled repeatedly during these events, suggesting they served as choreographic guides for these survival-focused orgies. Communities developed elaborate social structures around these practices to maintain order. Evidence suggests specific roles and rotations were assigned to ensure everyone contributed to and benefited from the generated warmth. Because nothing builds community spirit quite like coordinated thermal sexual activity in sub-zero temperatures. The practice appears to have been widespread, with similar evidence found from France to Siberia. Different communities developed variations based on their specific needs and circumstances, but the basic principle remained constant: transform biological drives into survival technology. And because Ice Age humans never missed an opportunity for efficiency, these events served multiple purposes. Beyond the immediate thermal benefits, they strengthened social bonds, ensured genetic diversity, and coordinated reproduction timing for the community. After all, if you're going to generate heat through group activity, you might as well get some population management out of it. But this wasn't just about immediate survival. These ritualized gatherings laid the groundwork for more complex social organizations. The need to coordinate large groups for survival activities eventually evolved into more sophisticated cultural practices, though perhaps less steamy ones. Which brings us to their next innovation in survival reproduction: synchronized pregnancy as a heating strategy. Because if group activities generated useful heat, multiple pregnant women in the same space were basically a mobile furnace. Human nature. Our ancestors figured out how to turn literally everything, including dating, into a survival technology. Ice Age communities discovered that synchronized pregnancies created a natural heating system that could keep entire groups alive through winter. Yes, they literally coordinated their baby-making schedules for maximum thermal efficiency. Archaeological sites like Paviland reveal something fascinating: clusters of infant remains that show clear seasonal birth patterns. This wasn't coincidence. It was carefully planned survival strategy. Multiple pregnant women sleeping together could maintain temperatures several degrees higher than individual sleepers, creating what archaeologists call maternal heating pods. The logistics were ruthlessly practical. Communities timed conception so that multiple women would reach their third trimester, when body temperature naturally increases during the coldest months. Groups of 4 to 6 pregnant women sleeping together could maintain a microclimate warm enough to significantly improve survival rates for both mothers and infants. But wait, it gets more calculated. These communities developed elaborate social systems to support this reproductive timing. Evidence suggests they used lunar tracking and seasonal markers to coordinate fertility windows. Because apparently, regular pregnancy wasn't complicated enough. It needed to be a group project. The archaeological record shows these weren't just convenient arrangements. Sites across Europe reveal specialized sleeping areas designed specifically for pregnant women, positioned to maximize heat retention and protect these valuable human furnaces from cold drafts. Some locations show evidence of heated stones placed strategically around these maternal sleeping zones, using the women's elevated body temperatures to create sustained warming systems. The strategy paid off in multiple ways. Communities that practiced synchronized pregnancy saw significantly lower infant mortality rates, up to 30% better survival than groups with randomized birth timing. Having multiple mothers giving birth within weeks of each other meant shared nursing duties, better resource distribution, and most importantly, concentrated body heat from multiple infants. Because infants generate more body heat per pound than adults, a cluster of babies was basically a tiny power plant. Archaeological evidence suggests communities would position nursing mothers and infants in the center of sleeping areas, using their combined thermal output to help warm the entire group. This system required incredible social coordination. Birth spacing had to be managed carefully to ensure enough adults remained capable of hunting and gathering, while others were in late pregnancy or caring for newborns. Evidence suggests communities developed specific roles for tracking and managing these reproductive schedules. Prehistoric family planning with a survival twist. The practice appears to have influenced everything from food storage strategies to hunting patterns. Communities had to ensure enough resources were stockpiled to support multiple pregnant women and newborns simultaneously, leading to more sophisticated preservation techniques and social organization. Of course, this level of reproductive coordination had lasting effects on human social development. The need to manage group pregnancy timing likely contributed to the development of more complex social hierarchies and planning capabilities. Because nothing builds administrative skills quite like trying to coordinate multiple pregnancies for maximum thermal efficiency. But even this carefully planned baby-making schedule wasn't enough on its own. Communities needed every possible heat source to survive, which is why they also got creative about using bodily functions in ways that would horrify modern health inspectors. Human nature. Leave it to our ancestors to turn even pregnancy into a precision-engineered heating system. The original Planned Parenthood was less about family planning and more about not freezing to death. So the next time you're complaining about your heating bill, remember, your ancestors survived by turning every social interaction into a thermal management system and every bodily function into a survival technology. They transformed death, reproduction, and basic hygiene into elaborate heat generation strategies that would make modern survivalists look like amateurs. Makes your thermostat squabbles seem almost adorably quaint, doesn't it?